I don't have trouble. You have trouble. How you doing? I retire every night.
I'm gonna say that when I'm there, I'm gonna say, I have a solution. We make a proclamation, we're not allowed to retire. What do you think of that?
I want some very big golden handcuffs.
We are waiting for you to let that, you know.
Debbie, are we ready in the back? We are, okay. Then we will go ahead and call this board briefing to order at 2:01 p.m. We've got a couple of topics today. The first of which is compensation philosophy and comparable counties, and I believe that Rachel's going to kick us off on this.
Yeah, and Debbie, can you give Cameron screen share abilities? Thank you. So yeah, I gave an update, a brief update on the job classification description study today. We are concurrently starting to run the compensation and pay equity study with Troop. One of the first things that the board needs to affirm or adjust is the compensation philosophy in the comparative counties. And so we have Cameron with Troop here today to present kind of what we've been doing, best practices, and give you a recommendation on how to proceed that you all can deliberate on. And then what I would like to do is bring back to you a resolution that adopts that. And looking at past documents out of HR and ones that I've seen coming before the board, there's been loose memos or one-pagers or emails that just describe what it is, but I think it'd be really great for the board to affirm what that philosophy is. And so I will turn it over to Cameron.
Hey, Cameron, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. All right, so we're going to go over, I call it the market study framework because everything that we're going to talk about today will frame the decisions that we make in the market study. So it's really important that you guys all understand and agree with what we start with for that market study. Because market studies, they really are as good as the framework that goes into it. If there are comparators that you all don't agree with, we want to make sure that we get that out of the way prior to starting the market study because we want to have reliable results. So we're going to go through compensation philosophy. I put this together with documents that I got from HR to try to kind of look at the history, including the current comparators and a little bit of history that HR put together of the current comparators. And then I'll also cover from a consulting perspective some best practices and my recommendations, Troop's recommendations for any changes that I think based on my review of your work that you guys should do going forward. So taking a look at the current compensation philosophy, like Rachel said, from notes and things, kind of the high level is looking, Tillamook believes that its employees are the key to delivering excellent county services. And that's why we're committed to attracting and retaining employees through fair and equitable pay and benefits. And then the highlights of that, the ways that we'll do that will be including conducting competitive market studies, on countywide positions and focus on internal pay equity, so equal pay for comparable work. And I know that that last part is making sure that the county is paying in line with the Oregon Equal Pay Act, which means that we need to pay jobs that are performing comparable work, comparable wages. So according to the same rules. And I won't get too deep into that except for that supersedes market data. So if there's two jobs that are significantly aligned in that area, we'll want to make sure that that takes precedence. Sorry, I skipped a little bit too fast. So based on the documents that I've seen, the market is defined as being within 5% of the total compensation market average. And total compensation includes salary along with medical, dental, vision, paid leave, retirement, and then HRA, VBA contributions if applicable. Those are employment, those are retirement accounts that have a dollar value. And so the total compensation figure wraps up the value of not just salary. And for salary, we do look specifically at the structure midpoint to make those comparisons. We look at min and max too, but the focus of the comparisons is in the middle of that structure. And the things that we don't look at is dollar values for factors that vary by employee. So lead pay would be one of those. That's a sort of what I would call an add-on pay that would be different based on your specific duties, but it doesn't belong to the job. It belongs to the employee. So we want to make sure that we are looking at values that are connected to the jobs and not employees, because we're doing a job analysis when we're looking at the market data. I want to pause here for a second and see if anybody has any questions.
I do, but I can wait till the end.
Okay. So taking a look at the current comparators, the criteria that frames this comes from a few statements that I've seen, and one says that the Oregon County is comparable to Tillamook based on cost of living indexed, cost of housing, population, and bordering geographic location for which Tillamook competes for talent. In 2017, and I understand this to be connected with a reference from an arbitration law, but in 2017, they also highlighted that comparable was defined as limited to communities with the same or nearest population within Oregon. So the most recent study comparators include the.
Oh, sorry, Cameron. Can I
Yep.
ask a question there before we move off of this? So in terms of the arbitration comparable counties, I've never been entirely clear about that. So does that mean that if we're in labor negotiations, and they go as far as arbitration, we are then required to have used those particular counties, but we're not limited to them? Or please explain it.
You know, I'm not well versed on the big picture of this in terms of arbitration. This law, I can look more into that, but I can't speak confidently to all the ramifications of that.
That's okay.
I just wanted to highlight one of the things that that was mentioned when looking at documentation about why the counties were included, but I don't know how it applies. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think she mentioned the arbitration law because so she included the statute, which was great. It's one that we use all the time, and I think it is appropriate. I looked it up, and when you look up statutes, there's a heading of generally what the statutes in that section apply to, and it was under arbitration, which was bizarre to me. But this is what is used for the comparable counties. So
Are we able to ask our labor attorney what the real piece surrounding that is? I think that would be helpful to us, because we tend to fall back to those statutory counties as being the largest pool of what we look at. It would be super helpful to know if that is a risk management tool that we're using, or if that is a requirement that we're using, or if it, just to know exactly what it is, because we are basing, I would suggest looking at the asterisks. The largest number of our chosen counties are based on that statutory comparator piece. So it would be really helpful, I think, to Commissioner Bell's question, and I share the question, to know what exactly that means.
And I addressed this when I was in the union, when I was negotiating, and it was always this kind of vague thing, but the county can always choose to go outside of those comparators. We're not stuck within that. And I actually asked, because I was used to the Teamsters, I asked Casey from Ask Me, and he also was like, as far as we know, the county sets the comparators they want to use, and then the union can say, we don't like these comparators. These aren't fair. So if like we went with just the statutory comparators, the numbers aren't even close to like, except for population. It only goes by population, so
Right.
it would be impossible for us just to use those.
But it
I
would be
think getting-
helpful to understand,
think you're right.
that if it's that way for arbitration, because if we end up in arbitration, that's what they would go back to, or what they would throw. I mean, I just would like to understand, and I think we all, share that question, because it has forever guided us. And the reason we went and added Polk and Jackson and Lincoln, so Clatsop is showing as statutory, but I didn't think that it was when we did it last time, maybe it was. But we added ones to try to acknowledge exactly what you just said, Paul, which is that our cost of living is so grossly different than many of the ones that are
It'd be
on
nice-
there.
It'd be nice to get the official,
Yeah.
legal defensible clarity. into it.
Exactly, to have legal defensible clarity so that we don't discover that what we've done is actually, if we end up in arbitration at somewhere, going to throw us under the bus.
Thank you.
That's fair. And in looking at these counties this year, it's interesting because is anybody privy to the source that was used to determine cost of living?
Do you have any answer?
Mary Jo, do you know?
No. Nobody in this room.
I
Well,
have
it
that.
wasn't very long ago. We did it when we were working with HR Annie, so it
Yeah.
was within 5 years ago.
I feel like if I dug through my emails deep enough, probably I could find a document related to that. But yeah, it was with HR Annie.
Yeah, and very specifically, we were looking at the costs of housing because we were having so much trouble recruiting people to move here and work here because they couldn't afford to live here.
Great. So moving on a little bit to
Yeah,
kind of,
who-
sorry, Chris.
Chris, do you have an insight to the answer to that question?
Yeah, so on the true form here, later on, it talks about the cost of labor, cost of living. Footnote 1, data from ERI geographic assessor as compared to Tillamook County. So, or compared to Oregon. So I don't know where else it came from.
Right. So that's the data that I used this year,
Okay.
but I wasn't sure what was used in the past.
Are you familiar with that data? Have you ever used that as a reference in any other studies?
I
such as
have
this?
I have used census data in grants that does talk about your salary, your mean salary. So I've gone through some of that stuff, but I've never heard this one as far as cost of living, cost of labor. I've used other census data information, but I'm not familiar with this one.
And I'm not familiar, but it also references the Oregon Blue Book, which I did reference, and the comparators, a lot of them aren't even close, which is surprising,
So,
except for,
and that's Cameron's footnotes?
yes.
Okay, so we'll get to that one on a future slide. Thank you. Okay, Cameron, go ahead, please.
All right. So then clicking through, Mary Jo did a fantastic job of putting together the history of the comparators since the 90s here. And so you can see that there's a few on here that kind of have always been comparators, or most often been comparators. Clatsop, Columbia, Lincoln. Looks like those were based on geographic comparators. And then they all kind of ebb and flow throughout as we look through until we get to today. And it looks like Lincoln is a recent comparator back to the list in the last few years. And so quite a bit of change every year. And it'll be interesting to see what comes from the labor attorney, because I know that just looking at the population data that we're going to see on the next slide from this year using the Blue Book, and in previous years, the populations, they they ebb and flow. And so maybe that's the reason why some of these expanded or reduced over the years. But that's kind of like a high level history. A lot of these have been on there for quite a bit of time, but other ones have changed. So yeah. Did I hear a question?
I was just looking to see, it's kind of interesting what we added when and what we threw out when, but yeah, thank you.
All right, so one of the things when I'm looking at the comparators is that the strengths are, that you guys have a consistent criteria that you guys have been looking at for those things. I think some of the gaps that I've heard in this list in particular is that in this list, there are gaps in healthcare positions and the ability to match them. And then I've heard library system jobs as well. The healthcare positions is quite a big gap. The library system jobs, when I did an analysis of the jobs that would need to specifically match to a library system rather than just a library, those would be just the top 1 or 2 jobs. And so that gap's a little bit smaller when it comes to that. And so we'll work on addressing those gaps in further slides. Looking at the ERI, the Economic Research Institute data for cost of labor and cost of living. And this is Economic Research Institute is a standard tool that compensation professionals use to review data. I know I've been in the industry for a little bit more than 20 years, and it's been the standard in all of that time for compensation professionals to use. We particularly focus on cost of labor, which is the costs of that's the push and pull of supply and demand, versus cost of living, which is measured by the required costs to maintain a certain standard of living. But one thing that kind of stands out to me about this data is I know Baker, when you look at the history of that list, they've been on here for quite some time, but they stand out in that the cost of living that's measured by ERI, and ERI looks more than just housing. It's a number of factors. The cost of living is quite a bit lower as compared to Tillamook. So when we look at this sheet, we've got the jurisdiction, right? Each one, and these are the cost of labor and cost of living as compared to Tillamook County. So Tillamook at the bottom is 100% for each one of those, and so Baker, based on cost of labor, is about 4% lower. It's hard to get exact, so that's fine based on cost of labor, but you can see that cost of living is kind of an outlier. So as we look through this data, the things that stand out to me, of course, is Jackson's population. It's certainly an outlier in the mix of there. And I added Columbia for a couple reasons. Columbia, sorry, excuse me. Actually, I covered on the next slide, and I'll cover that on a couple slides about why to recommend Columbia. And but the population is close to Tillamook, and the cost of living and cost of labor are also near it. And I'll highlight my changes on a previous slide. But any questions before I move on from this slide?
Hi, Cameron. Yes, it's Mary Faith.
Yeah.
So I recall vividly the discussions that we had about adding Jackson County because it's so much bigger than Tillamook County, and the reason specifically was the cost of housing. So I'm wondering how you have assessed the cost of housing, if you're including it in the cost of living or if it's separate.
So the cost of living is already baked for me by ERI, and they include, let me see if I included it on my notes. They include costs, they call it a market basket of goods and services, including consumables, transportation, health services, housing, and taxes. That's what's included in their figures there. And so yeah, the population stands out. But those other factors I feel like are still in line.
Okay, thanks. So we didn't look at housing separately. Do I understand that correctly?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So I just a question, Morrow is on there, but there are no numbers, and obviously the population
right.
is significantly below our population and it has no numbers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I meant to highlight that. Sorry about that. Yeah. The ERI just didn't have anything for near Morrow or Morrow to cover that. So it's just without data based on ERI's assessment.
Okay. And I guess it's just a point of interest that while cost of living bounces above and below Tillamook County, cost of labor other than Polk, where it's equal, is always below Tillamook County. Just doesn't mean anything other than
I had that observation as well.
Any other questions before she moves on to recommendations? Okay. Let's hear your recommendations.
So I want to pause first for a moment on best practice. So when you're doing analysis of market data, we always recommend that factors related to the comparisons are as consistent as possible so that you can make year over year comparisons that can be compared. You don't want to decide one year that these 5 positions are under market and then the next year change your comparator market and then all of a sudden they're over market. You want to try to see if you can keep those consistent as much as possible so those year over year comparisons can make sense. If you find that a position's way under market or over market one year, you might want to wait and see to see what happens the next time. But if you've changed your comparator market, it's going to be harder to follow. So you want to keep the comparators and total compensation factors as consistent as possible. The next one is that the difference between cost of labor between locations should be normalized and corrected. So I appreciate that you guys have already been using that approach, looking at cost of living. Cost of labor is a little bit different. That's the costs to those different locations. And when we look back at that slide, most of these are within 5% of Tillamook. But if we use the comparator that was 5% or more, generally I prefer to adjust those so that we're not overstating the data based on that cost of labor. So normalizing it if you use comparators that are consistently higher. And I'm going to touch on this more towards the end of the slide deck, but when we're talking about pay being considered at market, what I usually recommend to my clients is that pay is at market when it's within 5% of the market target. And so we're going to have some more conversation about this as we go through the slide deck, but that's a general best practice that I let my clients know that they've arrived at making market parity, in my view, when they have their pay within 5% of the target. And then the last thing is collecting additional resources as needed and applying them consistently. So I'm going to recommend another market source to add to this data so that we can fill in the data on some of these jobs. And with that, we want to apply it consistently, meaning applying it to a whole family or function and not peppering in other resources because we want to still maintain a sense of internal equity with our resource, with our sources as well. Moving on to the recommended comparator changes. So as I said before, where I stand most solidly is that trying to keep consistent year after year. Is the county happy with the current comparators? If there are no glaring issues, I recommend you just sticking with the 2023 comparators. If you can, once you look into that statute. If you want to make changes, the two that I feel like are the weakest comparators is Baker, for the reasons that I stated before. The cost of living, looking at all the factors, seems pretty different. It's one of the smallest comparators in the counties. And then also Jackson, because of the size of the organization and the lack of geographic closeness. That seems to me like I'd be curious if you guys often lose employees to Jackson County. And then I'd recommend, if you were taking those two off, or even one or the other off, that you replace it with Columbia County, because of its geographic proximity, relative population size. And then the only thing about that is that the cost of labor is a little bit higher, but as Commissioner, I'm sorry, Aaron mentioned, I forgot your last name.
That's okay, no worries.
It's not that we don't have a little bit of room to go above, because all of the other costs of labors were beneath you all. And so I think that even if we didn't adjust Columbia, things would level out.
I have a couple questions on this. Why is Morrow even considered being to stay in there? I did the Blue Book, Oregon Blue Book and census, and Morrow has 12,000 people. And that's the only information we had on the slide, but I can tell you that their average home price is $229,000, in Tillamook's is $408,000. Their average individual income or per capita income is $30,000, and ours is $37,000. They make more money, but their cost of living is extremely low for the house. They can buy a house for $200,000. I just felt like that one's really an outlier because of the low population. And Mel, here's another one that concerns me a little bit. The mortgage rates are way different. Like Tillamook's way more expensive, and they're not geographically close. So I feel like those two were strange. Although Malahira's population is closer to us, but Morrow to me seems like it was thrown in there last year to bring everything down to a level rather than actual, average up. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I also noticed that, oops, sorry for messing with your display. I also noticed that Morrow is a little bit of an outlier, especially in the geographic closeness, in an effort to stay kind of close and consistent to what was done, the most recent change. I picked on the ones that were different outliers with Baker and Jackson, but I think that those are fantastic reasons to remove it, especially, I didn't have any data on Morrow to get that. I didn't search for more data like you did, and it could have, but so what I'm trying to say is, I think that those are great reasons to exclude Morrow.
I think Columbia is a great addition, by the way. Those numbers are, like their housing cost is $390,000 versus ours $408,000. So we're starting to get closer. They also make more money, but per capita is about the same. So Columbia's, I think, is a good comparator. I think one of the things, I'll just say it, I'll be the guy. There were some changes last year that happened that I don't agree with. And I really appreciate that what we're doing now with Troop is getting to a real accurate number. Like whether we like it or not, I just want to make sure, and it sounds like you're doing that. And Morrow was the biggest one. Malheur and Morrow are both ones that I've dealt with as a Teamster for years, that they always just seem like there's a different world out there. It's not even close to the cost of living we have here. And out there, the prices of houses are small, but you're probably getting a 10-acre ranch too, or a 5-acre ranch. So anyway, I appreciate the work that you're doing. I think you're doing great. But I guess I'm not afraid of changing comparators and starting 2024 or 2025 as the new norm going forward, so that we pick the best ones, not hold on to ones that just don't really apply, or that artificially bring everything down, because that's not helping us solve our retention and recruitment issues.
Absolutely.
So Commissioner Bell, thoughts on removing Morrow?
Yeah, I think we should remove Morrow for all the reasons Paul said, and particularly because we don't have any data on it, which makes it kind of a pointless comparator.
I agree. So I think there's guidance, Cameron, to remove Morrow. Malheur, I didn't look at carefully. In the other stuff, it seemed to more align. So I know, Paul, you dug in more deeply.
I would trust your opinion on that one. That one's kind of like.
Okay,
that's
so
not the
Cameron,
ball.
if you would take that look at Malheur again and see if it, because it's 96.5, 96.4, 31,000, it's, if I followed that line correctly across, populationally, that's not a word, but for the population, it's pretty close to us, but I agree, it's far across the state. But it looks like cost of living and cost of labor are not that far off. We all good with leaving Malheur?
Sure.
Okay.
If
And
we
I
add
agree with
Columbia,
adding Columbia.
Yeah, adding Columbia, removing Jackson.
removing Morrow.
Yeah, we are, so removing Morrow. What do you think about Jackson, or do you want to get that answer to the housing cost before we do that?
I really would, just because it was significant in us determining that we should have Jackson in. So I'd just like to look at the housing costs a little more carefully.
Okay.
Because a bunch of the smaller counties did not,
I did not get Jackson. That's
Yeah.
all I didn't get.
Yeah.
I know.
a bunch of the smaller counties didn't come close to our cost of housing, but Jackson did, which was why we added it.
Okay, so Cameron, we're gonna, we would love for you to get either a little more information if you can, or we'll look for what that cost of housing, where it came from. Paul's found some in the blue book that we can use, or that maybe you could find and see if you can find a Jackson County number. But also, I'll do a quick email search back to the stuff from HR Annie and see if I can find the reference to what they used that might make it helpful. But it sounds like there's a little tweaking to do there yet.
Yeah, but I do agree with dropping Baker also, Baker and Morrow,
Okay,
and adding Columbia.
so have we completely confused the issue, Cameron, or do you get some clear guidance out of our consensus here?
Let me tell you what I understand so far.
Thank you.
So I'm hearing drop Baker, drop Morrow, and then we're going to do a little bit more research on Jackson and Malheur,
Yes.
and we're going to add Columbia.
Correct. I think.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So more to come. We'll try to act quickly. We know we're working on a time frame.
Yeah, on this topic, do you want to bring this back and talk about it as a group, or would you like me to talk with you individually and give guidance to Cameron on those two?
I'm fine with that.
And ultimately, it will come back before you in a resolution for a vote, but to guide that. And maybe it depends on the
I
outcome.
can
of
look
the
at Jackson's
information.
housing right now if you want that answer.
I think if you come to us, we'll know if there's significantly more issues that we want to dig into.
Yeah. And if I'm seeing a consensus, I'll draft the resolution and bring it to you for, okay.
Great, thank you.
Great.
And I think we also wanted more information about what it means, what the statutory comparators mean. Like, if we ended up in arbitration, which I hope we don't, but if we did, are we required to have Baker and Morrow? Then we'd have to add them back in.
No, yes, we talked about that as a to-do for me to chase, yes.
So Rachel, we'll check, go talk to Jenny and get that through our labor attorney, what that means.
Jackson's household, according to the census from the Blue Book, is very similar to 400,000 versus 408.
For housing.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the wages are very similar, so that might be why you
Yeah.
did that.
Okay, so we'll work with Cameron on that one and
Yeah.
through Rachel. Okay, anything else for us, Cameron? I don't know if we got to the end of your slide deck before we sent you backwards and forwards and forwards and backwards.
Yeah, let's look at the last slide, which is just kind of big picture, recommended changes. I think that it would be helpful if we expanded the comparator market for the healthcare positions. One of the data sources that Troop has access to, and I think it's a good resource, is Comp Analyst. It's an aggregate market source that provides data from a great number of surveys. And so it has a healthcare cut of data that we could use and jobs that would match to kind of fill in those holes. For those jobs, we'll try to still get them from the comparators, but if there are for the healthcare jobs, if we don't get data from that we could provide additional information with that data source.
Okay. Marlene also talked about there's a primary care organization that does a survey, and she has a copy of that survey that they have if you want to include that information as a factor as well. So I'm not sure how much Comp Analyst compares to that or if that would be helpful.
Survey sources are always great to have, and especially if that's something that she subscribes to, trusts, and feels like is relevant to your market. I think that that's a fantastic place to start.
We'll get you a copy of what they have. Other comparator market.
Yeah.
I would ask one more question, and that is, I know that for our law enforcement, one of the things that always comes up is that we don't compare to the city and we don't compare to the state, but there's a strong sense that those are comparators and competitors in our local county. So I don't, since we're looking at with healthcare, how do we get the comparators that we need when we're not sure, when we're not finding them in our counties? Are there other sectors where we should be doing that as well? Law enforcement as an example?
That's interesting. I wasn't, I think that I remember somebody mentioning that about law enforcement. Yeah, city, especially for those jobs, are those Teamsters?
Yes. Yes.
And so we could add those two in specifically for Teamsters for the city and the state jobs, so that we have a robust response there, because I'm sure that they all look directly over at the city. I'm curious though, looking at city and state for those particular positions, it sounds like the county has a statute that ties you all to specifically comparing to other counties. And so I'm wondering if we added the city and the state, particularly just for Teamsters, will we get much Me Too from the other groups?
Yeah, we talked about this early on, and not even groups, but certain positions that have been hard to find in counties. There's been talk about, do we go out for market for those? And then if we do, how does that impact, especially from a pay equity issue, if we're looking at other jobs that don't end up at a higher market, but we go out on the private market and they're higher. So I don't disagree at all, but it does kind of open a can of worms if we're going to start having more private market comparisons or cities and state.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but it's definitely been part of the conversation that I think we want to have as part of this conversation. Otherwise, I think we may find ourselves back here again. And if we're really trying to get the complete right list of comparators now, we need to flesh this out, not necessarily made a decision today, but flesh out this piece of the conversation to make sure we know where we're going and to make sure that we really have looked at all the options that need to be looked at, I guess. So that's why I bring it up. I don't know, Commissioner?
Oh, I appreciate you bringing it up, and I think we absolutely should talk about it, because for the sheriff's office, it's one of the most difficult departments to recruit for. Maybe the health department, healthcare professionals is the other. Maybe, I see Chris has his hand up again, maybe truck drivers is the third. So
ODOT.
it's definitely, it's definitely true that we lose people to, I've heard that the city of Manzanita pays more than us. I've heard that the city of Tillamook pays more than us. I don't know that that's true. I've heard everybody say that the state police pays more than anyone. So,
By law.
by law. So, yeah, so I, I don't know who all we would use, but consistently I hear that we hire people, we train people, and, within a year or two, they move to some adjacent law enforcement, situation where they're just going to make more money. So I think we would be crazy to not look at that. And yes, it opens up the question, like, if we're gonna add external, outside of the county comparators, then where else should we be adding them? I don't think we add them everywhere, but there probably are some places where we should.
I think the can of worms is a realistic thing, but also I think that and perhaps Troop can do this, healthcare and law enforcement can be easily identified because they carry a state certification. So, once you go to the academy, you can go work for any agency. So what happens here is a lot of times is they'll just leave the sheriff's office, walk next door and get a job at state police making twice as much. Same thing with nursing. It's hard for them to attract nurses here or other medical staff. So I think maybe that's something we need to look at is, I don't know if this is true, but I think that other markets like an administrative assistant, I don't know if there's that big of a difference between, but maybe there is, and I don't know the answer to that.
So what I'm hearing is, and I I agree. I think
The
there,
state is impossible.
yeah, I
It's
think,
hard.
I think ultimately we may compare to these and at some point we may end up saying, yes, we see it and
yes.
there's just no way that financially we can be on par with that comparator. But maybe not. Maybe we'll discover there's a way. But I think that's what I would want to say in any of these explorations to everyone who's listening is the fact that we're exploring it doesn't mean that we're committing to meet it, because everything, of course, is dependent upon the dollars that we have and the ability to do that. So, right. But I think we want to look at it because we want to see if there is a way. We don't want to throw it out of hand. We just want to do it with our eyes wide open, that we know we're going into a difficult conversation here that the end of it may not be, and we'll pay you what the highest comparator is.
So I agree, and I think if you're okay with this, Troop and I working offline to figure out how to bring this back to you for what this looks like. Yeah. Is that something you can work on, Cameron? We can work on
Looking into state and state and city comparatives.
I think it's a
since-
broader question of looking at private market and other governmental entities in general across all county positions and where it makes the most sense to fit it in or not fit it in. Without completely disrupting the apple cart and pay equity, but it seems like it makes sense in certain situations if we can accommodate that.
Anecdotally, I'll just share a short story. My brother-in-law retired from the sheriff's office in another county, and he immediately went to work for a small city in that county. And so now he's a retiree working in the city, and he said he makes so much more working in the city, that's a small city, than he did in working for a large county. And there are more employees and the work is easier and it feels safer to him because his backup is within a couple of minutes as opposed to 20 or 30. So that makes me think, well, of course people are moving. Of course they are.
Yeah. Okay, well, Rachel, then I think we leave you and Cameron with the challenge of trying to figure out where we should be looking at comparators other than just straight county in order to try to come up with a compensation strategy that works. Okay. So the second bullet then was continuing to target plus or minus 5%.
Right. So that's, again, with the recommendations, I primarily, tell people that's at market. But to go much more precise, than plus or minus 5%, it gets into, I mean, you lose one high paying, comparator, say one of your comparators eliminates a position, and then the next year the data has changed, significantly or even just by several percentage points just because of one comparator. And so when you have this is a relatively small sample sizes, it's great when you're doing a comparator market, but compared to, hundreds of companies in some data sources, it can move just with someone adding or removing a job. And the plus and minus 5%, it works when we need to put it into the current pay structure. And so that when we put it in the current pay structure, that sometimes it might have to be set at the market. And then, maybe it's 1% off or 2% off. And so that's why the plus or minus 5% generally is a recommendation.
Thank you.
And then just using the consistent total compensation factor so that we keep those same year over year. That is the end of my slide deck.
Okay. Cameron, I have another question. In a recent conversation with you, you shared with us that it's a best practice for people to be supervisors to be 10% above the people they supervise. And we've never identified that as part of our compensation philosophy. So when we talked about it, I thought, well, that's a good idea. And I've heard from other people that it's a best practice, but it's not part of our compensation philosophy. And so I'm wondering if it should be, and if this is the place for it.
I think that at Troop, we kind of like to divide compensation philosophy and compensation practices into two kind of places. And compensation philosophy is high level, what you pay and why you pay it. And then compensation practices would get into things like aligning supervisors above their supervised, and how you administer like lead pay and things like that. And so I would say for this high level conversation, for just compensation philosophy, I would put it more into the compensation practices discussion. And I think that we can have further conversation about that after looking at the market and diving into that more then, or we could have it here if that's something you guys want to adopt here now.
If we're going to address compensation practices in the same way we're addressing philosophy now, that's fine with me. I just don't want us to miss it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, to look at it in practices. But to make sure that we do, that we absolutely circle back, because I assume that we will as we look at classification and the structure we're building with that as well. So it'll be kind of hopefully baked into that.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Cameron. At the end of this, there's going to be a suite of things that are in a final action plan, if you will, of how we're going to, do market annually or every 2 years, how we want to pay people and process things and practices.
Yeah, I believe so. I don't have the contract in front of me, but I know that typically compensation practices is part of our project. And if not, we can definitely include it to make sure that it is there.
Excellent. Anything else, commissioners?
Not for me, but Madam Chair, I would suggest that there are a lot of people who are interested in this conversation, and I wonder if any of them have questions.
Perfect. Any of our leaders online that have a question that we didn't ask or a comment that you think should be included? If you want to raise your hand, I'll call you in an orderly fashion. Chris.
Now, I guess I like to talk. My comment is expanding Teamsters to look at the state level is the county road departments, the maintenance guys, the direct competition with that is the Oregon Department of Transportation's maintenance yard. So usually when they put a job out there, our guys backfill that. And as we've changed to PERS, that makes us even less attractive per se. And it makes them more desirable because that range of pay differential increases when you look at total compensation. So if we're going to expand Teamsters to look at the state level, the road department, our direct competitor is ODOT. The rest of it, not so much, but just if we're going to do the Me Too philosophy or that thought, we need to be conscious of that.
Thank you, Chris. I think that's a good point. And I would speak to the leaders online who are probably also sitting there thinking, who is my competitor? Or sitting there thinking, I know who my competitor is. That's the unusual. And I think communicating that with Rachel would probably be a good way for us to move this forward, because I imagine that each one of you sitting in your departments thinks about, for me, it is this particular other employer. And I think that's the can of worms in part that we're talking about opening, is that may make this virtually an impossible thing, to do, but by golly, we're worth giving it a shot before we decide that we've tangled ourselves in a knot we can't untangle. So please, if you're listening, and Rachel, maybe you could send out an email inviting anyone who wasn't listening today to have that same opportunity, to understand that we are looking at our comparators as other counties for sure, but we are also asking department heads to identify if they have an ongoing I don't know, say competitive. It's a competing employer. Thank you. That they would like us to have in mind as we work to create, a really, really good market study. Okay.
And of course, Josh wants to chime in.
Oh, yes, please, Sheriff.
So first of all, I would like to say that I very much appreciate the fact that there's this much time and effort being put into this conversation. I think this is valuable and has probably been needed for some time. And just because Cameron probably hasn't heard me say it before, and we have a new group of people in here, I just want to reiterate my opposition to the plus minus 5% being considered in market, just simply because it gives the message to staff that if they're within 5%, we are telling them we're comfortable paying them 5% less than their comparator. And that's kind of a slap in the face to some staff to be paid 5% less and to have the employers say, we're good with that. So not sure how you get around that, but I think that the goal should be market, not plus or minus. It should be market. But like I said, I just wanted to make sure to be on the record, and Commissioner Scar, you said if there was any comments, so I threw mine in there.
Perfect. Thank you. No, I mean, we want everybody's voices to be in this conversation. That is the direction that we have been moving, and it doesn't help us if you all have those thoughts and they're being shared perhaps with one another, but not with us in this environment where we most need them. So thank you for your willingness to speak up.
So just something to add to that, I did talk to Paul a little bit about this, because I thought it might be a little bit of a concern in locking into that. And in part agreeing with the sentiment that's out there is, one thing you could do if this was something that you wanted to elaborate on is adopting, haven't fully thought this through in my head, but you could adopt the philosophy of the plus minus 5%, and that is ultimately the philosophy, and understanding that part of the reason that you've landed on that is it's standard, it's a best practice, and we're trying to plug people into certain pay tables, et cetera, and it's not a perfect fit all the time. So you need that flexibility. However, further elaborating on it, that your intent is, if this was your intent, while this is our philosophy, our real intent is to be able to pay people at market, not below or above. So I think there is some room in that resolution if you wanted to further elaborate on what your real intent is, if it is, but have the philosophy differ from that a little bit. So if you're interested in that, we could explore something like that in a resolution.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Okay. Anything else? Hearing nothing else. Cameron, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to hearing back from you and Rachel on next steps. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Our next topic, and I do apologize. I think you actually had a 3 o'clock DA Olson, and we just ran right over the top of that. So I do apologize. This was just a really important conversation to not cut off in the middle, I think. So I hope you accept my apologies. The next thing that we have is the MDI succession plan.
Do you want to come up or stay in the gallery? It's up to you, Dr. B. Okay. Thank you for the time, and I had court at 3, then I'd be like, well, I'm out. It was a staff meeting, it's a standing meeting. Worst case, I have let my staff know we are delayed, and if worst case, we'll postpone.
Thank you for that.
This conversation is very important to the county. It's very important to Dr. Betlinski, Dr. B for short.
Didn't have it, he couldn't retire, so maybe that was our ulterior
That's my
motive.
motion.
I'll have you know, I retire every night.
So in the interest of brevity, I did provide documents in advance. I have another document that I have, and I have printed off copies for everyone that I'll share at the end of the meeting. I'm just the kind of person, I don't want people reading ahead before I get to the topic. So I have presented what I plan to open as a chief medical legal death investigator position. Medical legal is what the statute uses. Medico-legal is what is referenced in some of the materials. I'm going to say MDI for short. So other counties are going to this model. Dr. B and I have been in conversation with Dr. Hurst, our state's medical examiner, the chief medical examiner for the state, and he highly recommends this program as outlined in the MEOW summary. And yes, they laugh. It's okay to laugh at it being called MEOW. We didn't come up with that. But where we are is Dr. B has been our medical examiner in this county for 45 years.
Decades.
And it's wild because I was reading a cold case recently and was reading through all this really old stuff from the mid-1980s. And, you know, all the people listed are long gone, all the technology long gone. Then there's this one name, Dr. Betlinski. So I call him, I'm like, tell me what you remember about that. And I mean, of course he, you know, the brain of an elephant remembers every detail, all the specifics. It is not going to be good for this county to lose him. But I want to point out, I'm bringing this up at the outset of this conversation, that his experience and tenure allows him to operate at extreme efficiency. I mean, he takes so little time to do what he does, to make determinations, and he's a one-man show. So I am going to be proposing, or I am proposing, that the county move to a medical legal death investigation model and program, not just position for chief MDI, but we still need a medical examiner. The MDI does not have to be a medical examiner. They don't have to be medically trained. But in order to certify deaths as required by statute, the only person authorized to be the the only one authorized to actually do that is the medical examiner, and they have to be a certified physician. So that's why we have to have a physician. The MDI and the MDI program, people can do work that Dr. B is doing. Currently, what Dr. B does is he gets calls in the middle of the night from law enforcement. Somebody's died. It might be a homicide. It might be a natural causes death. It might be a suicide. It might be an unknown. In a lot of the situations, he gets dressed, gets in his car, and he drives to the scene. However far out he has to go, he gets reimbursed for his mileage. And then if he doesn't need to go to the scene, he might get the information from law enforcement, and he'll say, okay, you know, we'll transport the body to WADS per our contract, and he'll examine the body maybe the next day. Maybe he goes straight to WADS, but he's working all hours of the night. He hardly takes vacation, and when he does, we are crippled in the time that he's actually, a lot of times he goes on vacation but leaves his phone on. And I've really learned in the last 2 years exactly how crippling it is when he's gone. We have in the last year or two, I think really just a year, have actually certified 3 part-time MDIs that are employed by various law enforcement agencies. We have 2 that work for the sheriff's office, 1 that works for the city. That has created, it's been helpful because those people can respond to the scene. The idea is they're already on duty when the call goes out. We had issues when, or have had issues when Dr. B's gone on vacation, and it's like, well, call the MDI, and then all of a sudden, well, they're not on duty, and we're not paying their overtime. So that has created complications. It's also hard when, what if they're tied up on some crash scene that has the highway closed down, and they can't make it, to the other end of the county to go be the MDI on scene. So then I have to step into that role, and I'm not trained for it. I took one semester of nursing school in 2000. I am not trained to fill that role, although statutorily, I am responsible for death investigations. So I have to make sure they happen. Doesn't mean I have to do them. I have to make sure they happen. So where that leaves us is we need a robust MDI program. Dr. B has tried extensively over the last couple of years to find a replacement. He's sent out letters, he's tried to recruit, he's taken people out on scene, and the reality is people just don't want to do what Dr. B does in the way he does it. They don't want to go to the scene. Most of them are full-time practitioners. They don't want to have patient calls, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and then now you're on a fatal crash at 3 a.m. They just don't want to do it. But what is being recommended is the actual medical examiner is only really needed to certify certain deaths. And I know I've met with my commissioner liaison, Mary Faith Bell, and then we did have one meeting where we included Commissioner Fournier, who was commissioner-elect at the time, to at least talk about, we've known about this, and we've been working in the background to plan for this. But the idea is that, I think Dr. B said, what do you average, about 120 deaths a year?
119 this lasted for 2024.
Okay, 119, I'm pretty on it.
You're right on.
And that's how many you responded to total, or is that how many you had to certify?
That's how many I was involved with. There are cases that somebody dies at home. It's a natural death. Officer on site, I talk with them. I find out who their provider is. And if the provider's willing and I'm willing, I can release the case to them. For example, a provider who just saw the patient the day before. And this wasn't an unexpected event to have happened. And it's okay by statute to release it to that physician for them to sign the death certificate. I have done it, one, for the provider. I've done it, two, for the family. Because the family often knows the provider that they have had also. And so the family gets the provider's name on the death certificate rather than mine as a quasi-stranger. So where I can do those. Others, as you've mentioned, I may not necessarily need to go to scene, but I need to go review the body, do an external examination, pull records together, and make a determination of cause of death and sign the death certificate on those. Others, as one last night, I needed to go to scene. And that was accomplished. So there's a great variety, and there's definitely latitude that's in there. But ultimately, those are 119 cases I was responsible for and making decisions on and going on.
How many of those 119 did you actually certify the cause of death and sign the death certificate?
To be honest with you, I don't know right now. If I were going to take a guess, I would say probably about 75%. But I'd have to go back and pull some numbers for you.
And so when Dr. B doesn't certify, it's someone's practitioner that's able to sign, or it could be the state medical
I was going to say, but I need to add that. In cases where an autopsy is done or where there's drug toxicology done because of the case, those are ultimately signed by the state medical examiner. I may sign a pending death certificate so the family has a legal document to work with, but it doesn't give the final cause of death. So that those are signed by the state forensic pathologist who's in charge of that case.
So with that, Dr. B's last budgeted amount was $67,000, but it's not a salary. It's, he submits information to us, and then we are able to pay, his vehicle reimbursement and the contracted cost for his services. What I'm proposing for a new program where you would have a chief medical death investigator who's actually responsible for the MDI program. and would work under the supervision of a medical examiner, under the direction of the medical examiner. The medical examiner themselves would only have to review the reports as, the medical MDI. The chief MDI would do the pulling of the records, could examine a body at WADS, would go out to the scene, would collaborate with law enforcement or any potential part-time MDIs who are on scene, who would have their initial reports. The chief MDI would be the coordinator. They would pull all those reports together. They would do all of the follow-up with their practitioners, getting medical records, talking to next of kin. The things that none of us think about that I learned recently this summer are important, like learning if somebody wanted to donate organs and how much time you have to do that in, and a whole bunch of things that happen, as part of when people die that none of us want to think about. The MDI would handle all of that and then collaborate with the medical examiner, submit reports to the medical examiner. The ME would then only have to review those reports and say, I need you to follow up on this, need you to follow up on that, or I'm ready to certify, here you go. And if the ME doesn't actually need to certify it because maybe it's a homicide case and it goes up to the state ME's office for autopsy and eventual certification, or maybe someone's family practitioner is able to certify it, then our MDI wouldn't even need to notify the ME. Unless, of course, if the ME comes in and says, I want you to notify me because I'm ultimately responsible under statute, they would collaborate with that. The other thing, this is a unique role. A lot of counties are actually moving to this. Obviously, the bigger counties have a robust program in place, but it makes more sense with their populations that they would have a full-time and then several, other MDIs that maybe even work full-time. I think Washington County has, 5 or 6 full-time people that do only this. What we propose is the full-time chief MDI, but then part-timers. The part-timers can be anybody. And we wouldn't employ them as county employees. They would be independent contractors. What I would want to do is reach out to our partner agencies. My first thought was, well, who's already going on to scene? Your EMTs, your paramedics, fire personnel, those people are on duty already. They're going to scene. We would reach out to them to see about contracting for people. My idea is that these people are on duty. They're at work. They're going to the scene. They're writing reports anyway. Now they're an MDI, and they collaborate with the MDI program to help us get these cohesive reports and to help the chief MDI. The chief MDI would coordinate that and be responsible for contracting with those people and maintaining a schedule. But the statute allows for MDIs to be law enforcement, but doesn't require it. In fact, the state medical examiner has said, and national standards say, that you should not actually use law enforcement for various reasons. There can be some conflicts of interest, perceived or actual. Law enforcement has a different mechanism of training, a different method of going into a home and looking around and doing their things. One thing that comes to mind for me is issues with search and seizure, when somebody can go in administratively on a death investigation compared to law enforcement going in and it potentially being a crime. And then Dr. B has told us how some of our law enforcement part-time MDIs who've gone on scene have had a hard time switching hats, if you will. If they respond to the scene as law enforcement responding to the scene, it's hard for them to go back out to their car and put on their MDI hat and come back in. So they could be law enforcement. That makes sense because we do have law enforcement. They're going to be getting called to these scenes anyway, but we could reach out to Adventist Health. Are there any nurses or maybe even CNAs, people who are interested in expanding their role, the people who can go to the scene? That way our chief MDI would only have to go to the scene if it's a big case, if it's a homicide, or if it's a scene where they think, you know what, yeah, I need to go to this. And that would ultimately be up to the MDI and the medical examiner. These are the scenes that the MDI is expected to go to. And these are the things that, based on their experience or training or policy, they could have the part-timers just report out to them, submit reports to them, and then follow up. I will point out, this is something I actually didn't dawn on me until I was driving in this morning and thinking about this meeting, that I actually do quite a lot of work in these, in that law enforcement is required to send me death reports. So I don't really know what all reports they send to Dr. B. We don't have the same system. He does report stuff to the state's reporting system, but law enforcement is required to write a report and submit it to me, and I review all of those. If I had a chief MDI, they would do that, and I would no longer have to spend my time reading those reports. And let me tell you, if you read those reports regularly, you will learn to keep your house differently. The way they report on how a house looks and the details that go in it, it's like, I do a glance around my house. I'm like, well, I don't want to leave that out. I don't want to leave that out. It's silly. It's a side note, but it's like it changes your brain. That's the
Died
point.
today, yeah.
Anyways, but that is something that I do spend, I've never tracked my time. It was just one of those things that's like, oh, I could have somebody else do that. And then just notify me. And if there's a situation where you need to look at this, then they could let me know instead of me reading 120 reports a year. They do have to notify us. We still get called. Sometimes we'll go to a scene. But so I know the big question, the big concern, what's this going to cost us? We know what Dr. B currently costs us. He has not had an increase in his pay since 2014. Any other increases in his rate of pay or the contracted amount are simply based on the numbers. As the Meow summary puts it, we have had a sharp increase over the last several years of either accidental or overdose deaths. Tillamook County, I don't believe this is in the Meow summary, but I know this from the data that I get as a district attorney. The Tillamook County is one of the highest per 1,000 people of deaths requiring medical examiner services. We have more than our fair share of suicides in this county. We do have a large number of drug overdose deaths in this county compared to the capita per 1,000. So we do use our fair share of services. We would need to be market comparable. We would need, if we have a full-time position that's a county employee, they're going to have to get the benefits. Their salary is going to need to be comparable. In the position description, it's a draft, hasn't been run by HR. I didn't see the point in dragging them in until I'd met with you all. And so I actually copied a lot from the Clatsop County job description, looked at their pay. I know they are a comparator. Looked at their pay and found something that's similar on our pay scale. And as Dr. Hurst even told us, with trying to recruit these types of positions, an MDI is far less expensive than if we hired a full-time physician. I mean, just look at the salary range that I put for a chief MDI compared to our own county physicians. Drastic difference there. And then, of course, the other thing to consider is, I am estimating that the total program will cost between $100,000 to $150,000 a year. That would include the chief MDI salary. And then the other costs are kind of unknown right now because while we recruit for a chief MDI, we need to recruit for a medical examiner. And this is also I'm going to be coming to the board eventually to do that, or really soon actually, is we've been unsuccessful. Dr. B has not been able to find somebody to fill his shoes, and he's been trying for over 2 years?
Over 2 years.
When I first even before I was going to be DA, he came to me, he's like, okay, I want to retire. I'm sending out letters, trying to recruit somebody. And I propose that we open a recruitment for an independently contracted position for ME, and we open it nationwide. Maybe somebody can come here that's retired, but wants to come here and do some part-time work. What the pay looks like is up in the air right now. There was actually just last week, the DA's listserv was somebody new came in and was asking all the questions. How, what's the MDI structure? What's the ME structure in your county? And all of us were chiming in, and it is different across the board. One county said they pay per case. They pay a flat rate per case, but even that is considered, it's like $200 per case. Even that's considered outdated. It needs to be reconsidered because they're like, well, in some cases, all they do is answer a phone call, write down a few notes, and they're done. In other cases, like a homicide case, we do call in Dr. B to testify on those cases, and he's come to grand jury, he's come to trials before. So some of those cases, we do need him we do need that person to testify. So we don't really know what the market, what does it take? We have to have somebody, because if we don't get somebody, we're going to be tapping the state. Now, if you look at the MEOW summary, it is recommended that these positions be state positions, and I asked Dr. Hurst about that. What is the deal? What can we do to get these positions be state positions, like state troopers? And here's your outpost. You're new and don't have much seniority. You're going to Tillamook. I mean, that's literally how it works in the state police, unless people are from here. So that is the thing that I don't really know. I would recommend that we post a position for an independent contractor for an ME, and pay is to be determined, because it's going to be based on somebody with that specific skill set who's actually willing to come here and do this work, and how that's going to work out. Do we do per case? Yes.
That person, if they are just certifying investigating the information and certifying the death, that person can be remote, correct?
Absolutely.
So, or it could be Dr. B.
Potentially. I know we had that conversation offline. If, hey, you don't have to go out at 4 a.m. anymore, and you just have to look at paperwork, would you stay on a little longer?
We're worried that you'll be bored, really.
You can be remote, that's gonna open up quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you and I were speaking earlier about the state, and maybe soon, at state speed, they'll be solving, either have an ME that's at a state level for small counties like us that can have that, but I do have a couple of questions, I didn't know if it was time, if that's okay to.
Well, sure. Let me double check to make sure yes, go ahead.
Covered everything.
One of the things is, there could be weeks we don't have something that this person might want to do, maybe a week, or maybe it's a slow week. Is this a position that you would be able to, that would assist you in other investigations? Would they be able to serve as an investigator in other capacities for you? Because I know that you could always use a little help doing that.
Interesting you brought that up. I know we talked about that offline. I have wanted and considered having at least a part-time district attorney investigator. I have a great need for it. I know other counties have them. We're in a unique position because of our size. We are pretty small. But what we have seen, especially over the last 3 to 4 years, the increase in body cameras, the increase in just all the technology and things like that, there is a host of services a DA investigator could provide for us. Follow-up investigations when the police aren't able to do it. Investigations, here's a couple of examples. I have a case right now that's being worked by City PD, and I have an officer who is trying to get a search warrant, but doesn't have much experience with that. And we're having to work really hard, and timing, we're starting to get to a point where we might not get that search warrant. We might run out of time. If I had a DA investigator, they could really sit down and help that person, or apply for it themselves. Follow up witness interviews. You know, sometimes a police officer interviews somebody, and I would have asked 50 more questions because, well, I need to ask these things at trial, and I can't just call the witness, because then I insert myself in the investigation, I become a witness, and now I can't be the prosecutor on the case. So there are things like that would be tremendous. They could do things like discovery
This
assist.
position, you're saying that you could use this position to do some of that.
And that's, so when I talked to Dr. Hurst, when I first thought of how do we get this MDI position, I don't see how, because I know the numbers, I see our budget, I know exactly what Dr. B does. I see the reports, I get the calls, I know exactly what's going on. And now there are calls I don't get. If somebody dies in a hospital after being admitted within 24 hours, I actually don't get called on that, where he does. But I've been very concerned that how are 120 cases a year going to eat up somebody's 40 hours a week? And Dr. Hurst seems to think that by moving to a new model for an MDI, now granted, there would be some overlap in duties where Dr. B, that's why I said he's a one-man show and can do all these things and he's highly efficient. When you suddenly have an MDI who has to write reports and send them to the medical examiner, you're going to have an overlap of duties that Dr. B didn't have to do. If you have MDIs who are writing, in the field MDIs who are writing reports and sending them to the chief, you know, and then you have a chief who is coordinating schedules and things. Dr. B's not doing any of that. So that is time that would be spent on that. But I would be concerned, yes, that we don't have enough work for a full-time position. And how do we fill that? Do we make it a part-time position, or do we make it a full-time position and you have these extra duties? I did reach out to the health department. This is considered a medical death investigations. They're not all criminal. Maybe a small percentage actually turn into criminal cases. They are really considered more about public health and that aspect. So we did have a conversation, Commissioner Fournier, when you were Commissioner-elect, and then Commissioner Bell were there, because I wanted to reach out to the health department of, well, first of all, as a manager, I don't always want a new position or have to, like, this is new for me, so how do I navigate it? It's a new program, not everybody does it. We are kind of starting from scratch. So I was like, let's see if the other department, who already has doctors, who already has people who could fill this role, who have medical training, they have vehicles, look at all these things they have, they can take it. They have no interest. So we may be able to recruit one of their physicians to undertake this role as ME. But as far as the MDI role, because I thought, well, maybe they could absorb it. One of their people could absorb it. But we didn't get any traction. So I thought, well, okay, I'll do it. The responsibility falls under me statutorily. So this is a way we could get in the position and have that position fill extra duties. It would be a secondary role. Anything that's medical death investigation related would be absolute primary. And you're right. Sometimes we might not get a call one week, and then there are weeks when I think my record since being the actual DA was 6 in 1 week, 6 and 7 days. That's a lot of work, and there's a lot that goes on at the front end that you have to make sure is done. So
I also think one of the things, the reason I'm asking that is I think that's a great use of that position for you. Also, one of the things I'm thinking of is like doing a Len Bias overdose case or something where this person has a little more training to be able to handle that from start to finish, getting the autopsy done in the proper time and all that. So I think this is a great idea. I like the idea that they would be expanded, because I don't think they'd be busy enough for a full-time. And then the question about the volunteers, which I think is a great idea, bringing people, or the part-timers, were you thinking those were like 1099 employees? Are they volunteers, or you haven't really fleshed that out yet?
I think we need to get I would want a chief to kind of reach out to those people. I don't know. It depends on what the interest is. There might be people interested in volunteering because they want more experience. Maybe they want more pay. Maybe it's a small amount of pay. Maybe if it's, like I talked to the Union County DA, and she uses nurses, dispatchers, pretty much anybody who has an interest that she can find who want to expand their knowledge base and get more experience. So it would take reaching out. I want to start with our rural fire departments. All of our, Nestucca, Netarth Oceanside, Garibaldi, all of those, to see, do you have anybody that's interested? And what would it take to get them on board? What would it take to, they're having to do a little bit of extra paperwork that's not required by their agency. Maybe we offer a stipend. Yeah. But we need to have that conversation first to find out what that would entail. I know our law enforcement partners are willing to participate, and they're not getting any extra pay, at least from us, but we could step in if there's something that's going to take overtime, especially as we launch this program before we have a full team of part-timers, such as when Dr. B's gone out of town and, we've only got one law enforcement MDI, and he works for the city, and he's not on call, and he's not getting overtime. And we would have to probably enter an MOU or some sort of interagency contract, and there may be a stipend or bill us for the overtime. I don't know. You have to be careful with that. It's something that we would have to come back to this table with for sure. Again, this is the very beginning of this conversation. The first thing we need to do is recruit for an ME and recruit for a chief MD, or at least get approval for an MDI and then recruit for it. So I hope that answers your question.
It does.
It's a whole lot of I don't knows.
Well, that's fine. I think it should be at this point, it should be that.
Commissioner Bell, questions?
I'm with you so far. I think as I've been listening, I've been imagining if a shared ME position could be created because obviously other counties are in the same position. And we don't have the work for a full-time ME here, but, but I think there's real potential in a shared position, especially if that work can be done remotely.
I think you're exactly right. I know we did discuss that offline about maybe reaching out to Clatsop or Lincoln to see, would your ME be willing to also contract with us and do our ME services? And I think by opening a recruitment and then also like maybe emailing them like, hey, would you be interested part-time, crossing counties especially, but I think some of that is going to relate or depend on what the ME wants. If an ME is like, I'm only comfortable doing it if I'm there and I can see the body, then remote won't work. But if somebody's like, oh, I'm totally comfortable reviewing somebody else's reports and looking at all this and I can do it from New York. Okay.
Maybe there's somebody at AOC, someone in the capacity of AOC. I could ask if counties for you, be willing to share, partner with us. Might be
Sure, no, and
interesting.
I'm curious, because we did hear about this at AOC last year when the Meow report was coming out and they came and presented and talked about it. And I'm curious, there are some recommendations in there to see if they become legislative recommendations this year, such as putting that MDI at the state as a state employee. So I'm curious, if any of that's, starting to unfold, that may be in this session, that may also impact in how we do what we do locally. So have you heard anything about bills or anything that are being written or carried or hoped for?
I haven't yet. When I asked Dr. Hurst about this last year, I believe it was in the summer when we were talking with him, and he said the hope was to present this to the legislature, but I wasn't sure if it was even this upcoming legislative session. So I don't know. I haven't checked, and
Reach back out, since you're in that conversation, in that
Absolutely.
circle, to say, are we expecting any legislative asks related to the Meow recommendations? So that then we can kind of factor those in, at least to our thought process of what we're doing here, as we kind of try to figure out how to move it forward. I think I would be hesitant to open a position, for example, because I don't think we know enough to open a position for an ME even to say what we want. So it's a little challenging to put that out there and say, hey, we're looking for an ME. You could be remote or you could be here. Do you could want to see the bodies, you could not. Somehow we got to kind of figure out how to put that into a more tight circle, it feels like, before we could put out an RFP, so to speak. So I don't know if there's some informal conversations that maybe you can have with Lincoln County, Clatsop County, those that touch our borders with their DAs, to say, because if we're thinking a shared one, if it's nearby, for those who really want to do it more the way Dr. B's done it, which is more hands-on, maybe those conversations you can have with your DA, touch, county collaborator DAs, to say, what are you guys doing? What are you thinking? Do you think a regional approach would work? And we can identify that, hey, yeah, there's actually 4 that want to do regional, or nope, nobody's interested and this is just our game. So just a little bit more teasing out from the DA side on those pieces would be helpful, I think. And then we just have to at some point jump. We make your plan and you give us a written out plan. We have costs, we have details. And at some point we have to jump, because we do have to have a system, but it feels like there's a little more
Yeah,
teasing
he's
out
gonna
maybe.
leave at some point.
I
know,
will tell
right?
you
But he's
this.
still here
Answer the
today.
phone.
Well,
Paul, I just want to say, I don't want to be my own medical examiner, okay?
I will say this, in the conversations I have had with other DA's offices, I know that every ME, except for maybe like the big counties, but they are all independently contracted. So, and they're not all under DA's offices. And in no county does the DA have any supervision over the ME. It's just whether or not it's in their budget. We consider it more of a parking spot than anything else. It just kind of makes sense based on the way the statute reads. So as of now, everybody has to have what's under statute, it's a district medical examiner, and it's ORS Chapter 146 that outlines death investigations. And I'm going to give this printout at the end of the presentation, just so you all have it for reference, what I was relying on. But none of the MEs they're all district medical examiners, and none of the DAs supervise them. Budgets are different. If you can go to any website, and some counties have it through their county health department, some have it through the DA's office, some have the medical examiner program through the sheriff's office. but in everywhere it's independent contract with the ME. I believe the ME position and recruiting for that is actually primary to trying to open an MDI position and recruit for it, because we have to have the ME. And the ME would direct from there. The issue is that we've not been able to recruit an ME so far without having more support roles. As far as the legislation goes, I mean, the issue of whether we could have, is it a regional approach? I don't think that's something that is DA decided based on those differences I just described. It's something that would be up to the independent contractor. He might have something in the contract that's like, we don't want you doing this for another county, but it's up to the ME of, I mean, we're kind of at their mercy. Hey, we need this, will you do it? Because I thought when we approached the health department, couldn't we just say one of the physicians with the health department, you already work for the county and we're adding this to your job description? But it doesn't quite work that way. It's what do the doctors want to do?
Yep.
And so, I mean, sure, we could do that. But as far as what's in their contract, it's going to be up to them. So we would need to reach out to the MEs to say, would you have any interest in doing this? And we'll do that. We've talked about that, of reaching out to them and having just that conversation. Would you have an interest in doing this if you didn't have to come to our county? And the reason I say it'd be hard to put this in a job description, because again, we're at the mercy of the ME, at the doctor. They run the program. The statute says you are in charge of certifying this death. So you might have a doctor that says, I'm not comfortable with just relying on reports that I read on the computer screen from a distance. I want to at least lay eyes on the actual body.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think I would argue that we are at a place where we could at least draft a position and an RFP just to see what people propose. Let them propose to us. We don't have to put so many details of it can be remote or doesn't have to,
Or
have
the
to be here.
request for qualifications. So
Just-
Rachel, I'm going to look at you as our interim HR, as well as our contracting expert in the room. So what I think I'm hearing DA Olson say is that really we're looking almost for a request for qualifications, in a sense that says we're looking for an ME, and this position could be anything from remotely reviewing paperwork that comes through one or more MDIs, or it could be an ME that on the other end of the spectrum, if you will, that is on site, that is following the model that Dr. B has followed for years. But we're just trying to get a bead on who's out there and which of these models they might be willing to take advantage of. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's exactly what I'm saying, because it's going to be wholly dependent on what the person who's willing to sign a contract with us wants to do.
Okay, Dr. B.
If I can make a few comments,
Yes,
just
please.
background on this. I have been reaching out to physicians in the county, letting them know that I'm interested in slowing down or retiring completely. And you're right, I have not had any positive feedback of anybody who's interested. But I will say I haven't wanted to do it the way that I've been doing it. I will admit I get called out of the office when I was seeing patients. I'll also admit I never had a patient complain when they knew what I was doing.
Sure.
Okay, because they understood the impact for families. But that aside, other providers are not interested in getting suddenly called out. Some of them find a hard time dealing with death and dying.
Sure.
One provider who had retired that I had brought to a scene with me called me the next day and said, I can't do it. I had nightmares all night.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Just
not everybody.
dealing with living people is totally different than dealing with the dead. I think that with where the state is going on this, that we still have the possibility of getting an in-county provider, understanding it is more of an administrative position and going from there, but it still leaves them in the community so that families know who they are and have interactions with them. I haven't had a chance to really sell that. I have talked to the providers at the health department to describe this. I haven't had anything back, negative or positive, from them. I need to talk to Marlene about that. But I think that it's still possible where it's more of an administrative position that we'll be able to find somebody in county, so that if they still wanted to go see a specific case, they could, because of that benefit to them also. But I also, as an aside, I was recruited by another county to be their medical examiner, but I was not comfortable because I'm missing that interaction part. that part personally, I cherish. That's part that has been my own private thing to do to help the families. Again, just like last night.
Thank you.
I
So can we, a timeline on your retirement? Then I'm
Well,
sorry.
at this, my comment when I signed my contract is it's a July 1 to June 30 contract. I said I would like to retire at the end of this contract. I would not like to sign a new contract.
Okay, so we're looking at June 30 of
June 30,
25. We need to have
25.
our solution on that.
Right,
Okay,
right.
thank you. Commissioner?
I wonder if you'll talk to us a little bit about licensure requirements. I'm thinking, should we be recruiting from retired physicians? Do you have to have a current license? If we're
Yes.
recruiting nationwide, are you licensed in Oregon?
The answer is I would have to let Dr. Hurst answer that. I don't know that second part, but yes, you're required to have an active Oregon license if you're in Oregon.
Okay,
I do
And
not know
if-
about crossing state lines and doing this.
okay. So we would want to find that out before we did a nationwide recruitment.
Yeah.
And if a physician retires and lets their license lapse, is it hard to get it back?
There is, with the board, there is a window to get it back, but after that, it's a lot harder to get it back. So there's a bit of a window.
Because it seems like if somebody retired and had a little time and then realized they were bored or they'd like a little,
Mhm.
part-time here, 10 hours a week or whatever, that could be a good fit if they still had an active license.
Anecdotally, I've talked to several physicians that have retired and lost and let their licenses lapse. They have no interest,
Okay.
I wanted
but
to
that's a few.
I wanted to touch on your point, Commissioner Scar, about with the legislative session and things like that. And what we've done, the contract with Dr. B has been annual. So it's a one-year contract that we sign July 1st every year.
It's not July 1st. We sign it up in June.
If we got, we all know we're going into a long session that won't conclude until June.
Right.
And we're looking at, we're getting ready to start our own budget cycle for the 25-26 fiscal year. And we need to make these plans. I don't think we can wait to see what happens this legislative session because then we're going to be stuck.
Right.
And especially, we know that usually when laws take effect, it's like July 1. And so, or excuse me, it's usually January 1, unless it's, even those that are emergencies, they might take effect later. So,
Yeah, so I think with a June 30 retirement date, we don't have time to wait and see what happens. So Rachel, I'm going to go back to you as the HR person and the contracts person. I'm concerned if we have enough to move forward.
I don't know. I'm still trying to kind of put this together. I guess I would ask, what is the specific ask? Because I'm hearing, I know the need, I know the timeline, but I'm very unclear on what exactly you're wanting to do. So do you have, like you said you were going to hand out, do you have a specific plan on, I heard, so contracted ME, full-time employee, chief MDI, and then part-time contractors. I'm hearing contracted ME is the top priority.
I would say, because my whole reason for asking for the board briefing was the chief MDI, but realizing we do need to hire an ME. So those two together, we need to recruit for an ME, but because it's not a county employee, we wouldn't do a position description. And I've never done that. I've only done in-house county employees. So I wanted to make sure I brought that up that, oh yeah, we do need to ask, we need to figure out what that looks like. So I guess I'm asking for help with that because I have no idea what it looks like to contract with somebody. And it's
We can talk about the contract and how to prepare that.
exactly. And
I'm trying to put together your whole program.
right.
I'm trying to.
So it's an ME, we have to have that. And then I want to be able to get permission to post a chief MDI position. I'd like to recruit them at the same time. It's just, it's the county contract that I don't really work on. But I know I did a basic draft of what I'm looking for in the chief MDI position. Like I said, I haven't gone to HR, but I wanted to see if there's enough to go forward on that position so that I could work with HR to get an actual position description and be able to come before the board at a 9 o'clock meeting very soon to actually get approval for a new position. That's the main thing that I can do. The other thing was just county, we need an ME and we need to figure out how to get it.
They do go together.
But they do go together. We need to be recruiting for them at the same time.
Okay.
And I
But
would like,
doctor, am I right in thinking, sorry, that doctor, that we want to get the MDI on board because Dr. B can train that person?
I would, yes. The MDI, I mean, let's be real. It's January 15th. My initial goal was to be here last week, but I had trial. So first thing in January to get this position created, get approval for it, get it posted, have it out there for a month. If we get traction, interview people. I mean, it's gonna be April if we're moving at lightning speed before we got somebody started. So if we could have even a month of a chief MDI working with Dr. B, and then also working on this contracted RFP for an ME at the same time that the county would work on. But yes, having a chief MDI be able to work with Dr. B so that we have that person trained, at least by his standards. If we're lucky, Dr. B realizes he doesn't have to retire just yet. He likes this new model. The program is really something, I don't know that we even need board approval. I'm calling it the Tillamook County MDI program. Some counties call it their, ME's office, but it's under whatever other office. To me, it just fit to call it the MDI program that has these various
I think
roles.
what's helpful is that you've given us a dollar amount of 100 to 150,000. I think we need to have that sort of backed up and fleshed out, because that's really, we're in a position where we have to do this. There is not an option. We must have an MDI system that going forward. So that's not a choice. The question in now is that understanding of what has been a $67,000 contract unreasonably low, right? It's kind of like Bill Sargent, right? Some of you are so amazing and committed and you do this work because it's the right thing to do. But we are now moving into a world where we are replacing the right thing to do with an actual paid program, and we have to acknowledge that. So I think, commissioners, that's where we are, right? Is that we have to fund this somehow. That will be on us in the next budget cycle to figure out how we make this happen. So I guess I'm interested in having, if you envision it as a program, I'm interested in having it fleshed out and financially drawn out as the program you envision, so that we are actually moving forward what we believe is the need for our community. Does that make sense, commissioners? Okay, so then Rachel and Aubrey, do you have enough to work together as the HR director, as well as contract support, with what Aubrey's presented and our guidance to do what needs to come next? Do you need any other guidance from us?
Not from you. No, I'll talk with Aubrey Michael.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Understand that this is, it's an #1 top priority. We cannot not have an ME or MDI system. Obviously, that has significant impacts for way too many people. So,
Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very
I'll
much
pass
for your
out my
time.
documents. It's pretty
absolutely.
much
Thank
just
you.
my
Thank you
cheat
for what
sheet.
you've done for as long as you've done it, and your willingness to continue through June to get us where we need to be.
Thank you, Dr. B.
I'm disappointed in you.
You're
Dr.
welcome,
B.
Mary Kay.
I will hope that we hire an MDI that you like so much.
Well, and I think you and Rachel can then take that,
Well-
and flesh it out into kind of what
Are
we
we
need
still on
to have to
record?
consider.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
yeah, perfect, thank
It
you.
is a lot to unwrap. There's a lot there. And a lot of options.
Sure, you bet, you bet.
It's 36 different ways that it's happening right now.
Correct, it definitely is.
Thank you
So,
for your work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Fournier, you said you need to
I need
leave
to
in
run.
1 minute.
Mhm.
Is
I've
there
got nothing to
anything-
add except for, sorry, Rich, we just dumped more on you. But it's not our fault.
It's your HR hat mostly.
I know.
Okay,
Nope, I'm good.
you're good. Commissioner Bell, anything that you'd like to bring up today?
Well, we were just going to talk very briefly about the meetings on the 16th and the 18th for short-term rental and lodging owners and operators. My intention is to have just have a brief introduction where because that's what I offered them in the letter. I said we'd like to talk to you about this, to talk about where we have been, where we're going, what our justification is, why we think this is in the best interest of the county, briefly just make a little presentation, invite either or both of you, whoever's with me there, to make a little presentation. I haven't asked Nan yet, but I thought about this, and I was in her board meeting at noon. I thought, she's going to be there at these meetings, and so is Doug. So I might even ask them. I'll ask Nan if you guys think this is a good idea. I'll call her after this meeting and just say, would you put together a little bit of information about all of the great work that we've done investing TLT funds to date, because she has all that. And so, some brief presentations, letting people know, here's what we're thinking, this is why, this is what we've spent the money on to date, this is what we hope to accomplish, and then the rest of the meeting listening to them. So I'm thinking 2 minutes each. We'll ask people to think about if other people have already said what they need to say, not repeating what other people have said, but emailing us instead. And, hopefully we'll have plenty of time for people in the room and online to do it. I don't know if if they're scheduled for a time end. I don't know if we should go.
I would like to have a set a time end. I just think that's useful. We did it for the STR hearings, and we extended it once or twice because they're like, oh, there's only 5 people left,
Right.
But I think it's helpful to have an end, because otherwise you can end up sometimes in dialogue, which we've said we want to talk with you, which means there's a space potentially for not only presentations and comments, but maybe even some dialogue. And I think it's just helpful for everybody to know we've got 3 hours together. Let's, use our time wisely, that kind of thing.
Do you think 3 hours or two?
Would we start them at 5:30?
5:30 on Thursday and 10 on Saturday.
I don't have any idea how many people are going to show up. So maybe schedule it for 2, knowing it can stretch a little.
Yeah. Beyond 2, I think, I want people who've made the effort to be there to be able to comment. But beyond 2, people largely stop listening anyway because they're tired.
Yeah.
So we'll say 2 and then be flexible.
Okay. No, that sounds good. And I will be there on Thursday. I probably will make very limited comments just because I think it sounds like you've kind of got that laid out, and just let people know that, I'm there and happy that they're with us and part of this conversation, and, that we do obviously value what the short-term rentals bring to our community, and maybe echo some of the talking points from the short-term rental advisory committee work that I was a part of. So
good. Okay.
But I won't do a whole presentation per se.
Okay. And Paul, did you say you don't know yet when?
I'm going to be online.
Yeah, but you don't know yet if you can be to either of them, or if you have conflicting classes.
Yeah, I think my class ends at 5, but on Thursday, and then the Saturday I'm in class.
Okay.
During it. So.
Okay. All right.
And I think that's okay. I think we can give regrets for you without it being a big deal.
Right.
And then I don't know, are we recording these? Have we talked about that?
I assume so. We typically record in Teams, right?
Sarah had mentioned that she was going to bring.
Yeah, is she doing
her gear.
technology?
Sarah.
So Sarah, I see you online, and it sounds like you're doing technology for these meetings. She may also be multitasking, as many of us do.
She is.
Okay, multitasking.
No,
Doing technology.
She's running.
Yeah.
Okay, so if she's running technology.
It's in our recording.
Okay, and so my thought would be, just because Paul won't be able to necessarily be there and I won't be at the second one, in terms of capturing comments.
Sure.
It would be nice to be able to just share with everyone in the room that it is being recorded, and the commissioners who are not present will be listening and will get the benefit of your comments as well.
Good.
So that
Yeah.
might be nice.
Okay.
And then Paul, you can do what works best for you, knowing that you will have access to
Absolutely.
the full dynamics of the room.
Okay. Anything else on this? Suggestions? Ideas? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. No, thank you. Appreciate your taking the lead on this, and we'll look forward to hearing from our stakeholders. Okay, I do not have anything that needs to be shared today, given the fact that you need to get out of here.
Thank you.
Rachel? Nope. Anyone online? Something that we just need to hear today? Okay, not hearing any. We're going to adjourn this board briefing at 3:50 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Rachel? Sorry.
So Paul, random, I just want to throw this at you so I can throw away the note on my desk. You are now, Public Works Solid Waste, right? And so the Marion County waste burner that's being shut down, you familiar with that at all? Put that on your radar. Ask the sheriff. Apparently evidence disposal is done through the Marion County burner, and the Marion County burner is being shut down. So Marion County is, trying to figure out a way where they can get it not shut down, and that is one of the big talking points